Maybe pretzel is fine. Maybe it doesn't have to be half lotus. This one's going to be for me. I just went through the ringer, basically through hell and back in the past couple weeks due to a medical situation. So I'm going to bring you through the health situation, the health anxiety that I'm going through. This is also an example of something in my life that, right, it pulled me out of my center. So I'm also going to kind of talk about in general how I handle what I would call like a crisis being that which pulls me out of my faith and really makes me stressed out, where I'm like, I'm worked up, like I'm triggered. I'm not myself. You know, it's not just that I'm not calm. It's not just that I'm freaking out. It's like I'm completely wrapped up in it. Like I forget or don't have access to the meditative state, the centered awareness that is always aware of everything, no matter how chaotic, how intense. It's when I lose that connection. That's what I consider a crisis. And, you know, I really haven't been through one in a while. Like I've been pretty solid. So I'm going to bring you through how I handled that, because I do feel like I'm back. And I feel like me sitting here and talking about this is a great indication to myself that I'm doing well. Went to the doctor, had to go to a specialist who's a surgeon, right? I wasn't too concerned about this, right? But I thought I'd go get it checked out. And the doctor wasn't even that concerned, but he did say there was a possibility or an option of getting this surgically taken care of because they don't really heal on their own. I actually left the doctor's appointment feeling fine, right? And I've been through some shit before. I've never had to get surgery, but I've been through 2 broken bones. And when I broke my foot, I went through one of these experiences where I was thrown off center. I was put into a panic, a freak out, a fear-based place, right? At that time, I was deep in my skateboarding career, and I broke my foot, and I thought, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to lose all my skills. What if it doesn't heal right? Why did this happen to me? I was going into the past. I was like, why did I try one more time? I should have just walked away. I knew it wasn't going to happen. I didn't listen to myself. I was digging into the past, thinking about how it could have gone better. I was anxious about the future. That's what it is these injuries and these health predicaments. For me, it's one of my karmic things, and it seems like one that's going to be generally difficult for most people, that's going to throw you off center. It's going to put you into the past or put you into the future. So this kicked in for me with my current situation, not after the doctor's appointment, but after I started searching it up on Google and Reddit, where, you know, what I'm coming to learn about the world in which we currently live is that there's a ton of fear-based thinking. There are not a lot of people who have consciously worked through their fear-based conditioning and brought themselves to a place of love and optimism, right? There's a lot of fear-based thinking. And that's what I found when I searched this condition on the internet. A lot of fear-based thinking, a lot of worst-case scenarios. Basically, everyone's saying you definitely need surgery to fix this one. A lot of people giving their accounts of what went horribly wrong and all this stuff. And this put me into a really bad spiral. And just all this spiritual work I've been doing to get to this place of center and peace and joy, it just ripped me right out of that. And I was scared. I was thinking, I was putting myself months into the future of when the surgery might happen and thinking about how it was going to go and if it was going to hurt and if it was going to go wrong, you know, and if it was going to work at all and if it was going to be a recurrence and is this going to be something I deal with for years, right? I was fully going down this, right? And you see, now that I'm speaking about it, I see that I'm going into the future, and I'm leaving the present. And generally when you do that, it's not going to feel good, right? But I was getting lost in that, right? And then I too, like with the broken foot, started going into the past. Like, why haven't I been eating better? Like, did I cause this upon myself? Like, what did I do wrong? How could I have prevented this, right? Going into the past and the future, good sign that you're out of alignment. And I was suffering. This created mental anguish that far outweighed any physical symptoms I was having, right? This mental anguish, I would anticipate, felt worse, if we're going to, not that judging and comparing and scaling is really necessary, but I feel like this mental anguish I put myself through was far worse than the physical anguish of the surgery would have been and the recovery put together. I was imposing a suffering upon myself, a health anxiety suffering, right? One thing I went through was I was like, the doctor is not in a rush, but I started imposing rush on myself because of all the fear-based stuff I saw on the internet. And I was like, maybe I should just, call the doc and get this surgery right now. Like, just get it over with. I put myself into this rush. I fully took on the mindset of everything I was soaking in on the internet, right? All these people with a victim mentality, defeatist mindset. I got sucked into it and I put myself there. And I literally became sick, essentially. I became unable to socialize, unable to do my creative work. I took a week off, 2 weeks off, basically. Just debilitated. But nothing was actually wrong, right? Like, I'm fine, So I imposed a mental anguish upon myself, right? Through this all, although I was deep in the grasps of this, thanks to my spiritual work, including meditation, study, psychedelics, life experience, there was an ember of awareness that remained the whole time. Like, I knew that I was aware of what was happening, even though it was very painful and I was suffering. That ember of awareness was still there. And I'm very grateful for that, because this would have been much worse. The magnitude of the suffering would have been much worse without all the spiritual work I've done. Right? So there was this ember of awareness, and I was like, I kept trying to access it, but it was very difficult because this anxiety cloud was very powerful and very consuming, and I got completely lost in it for a time. And it's hard, it's hard with something like this. It's like when you might have to go through a surgery, something affecting your body so directly. Little car alarm. Right, so I was going through it. And, where I started to try to get through this from a spiritual standpoint was I started with that ember of awareness, right? And I tried to go deeper into that. I tried to sit there and be like, okay, I see this thing is happening to my body. In the future, there might need to be a surgery. I've seen all this information on the internet. I'm feeling this way. My body is tense and anxious, right? I sat down and I meditated on it. I made a TikTok I'll put up here referring to this situation for myself about observe it, sit with it, be aware of it, be aware that you are aware. If you're aware that you are aware, that means whatever this predicament is, it's not you, and you're capable of seeing it, sitting there and seeing it and letting it happen, right? So I was trying to bring myself to the observer perspective, which is a much more peaceful place no matter what no matter what the anguish is. And I tried to move towards acceptance because I was aware that there was a rejection happening, right? I started to think about mortality. If you think about the fact that we're all going to die one day, right? It's like, this happened to me. Okay, what is there exactly to fear if one day I'll be dead, right? I was freaking myself. I was freaking myself out. I debilitated myself mentally. But I don't know if I'm going to get hit by a bus on my bicycle the next day, right? So I started to become aware that it was pretty foolish to self-debilitate myself with my mind by living in the future so much. This spiritual line of thinking eventually bubbled through until I reached a tipping point, which I would call like a small scale awakening, where I was like, oh, this is what I just did to myself. It's the same thing that I did with the broken foot. It's the same thing I did. I remember one time I was having like a lot of acne on my lips, and I was like absolutely freaking that I had herpes on my mouth. Freaking. And I did the same thing. I put myself into an intense mental anguish. I lost myself completely. And realizing that this was a pattern was enormous for me, right? Enormous. Once you see that your suffering is part of a pattern that you have repeated many times, that's a key awakening moment, right? Because that gives you the perspective to be like, oh, am I doing something unhealthy to myself? Like, how is my ego playing a role in this, right? And it's interesting, the ego takes on the role of self-preservation. I mentioned I was thinking about mortality. It's like there is a place where you can accept whatever happens to your body as part of the universe's plan. And in that place, there's no anxiety about anything that happens, right? I think about my friend Chad. I've mentioned him as one of my spiritual mentors in the past. He's the guy who skateboards, taught me about meditation, really turned me on to the spiritual journey. I really thought about how he's had these like serious knee injuries, and he's a skateboarder like me. And the way he talked about his knee injuries, it didn't seem to get him like it got me when I broke my foot. He would just be like, yeah, hurt my knees, like gonna get the surgery. Like he wasn't stressed and anxious about it like I was when I broke my foot and in this predicament. So since he's someone who has been one of my mentors, I thought about this. I was like, how can I get there? How can I just let the next appointment come and proceed with my life until then? And how can I bring myself back to the moment, right? Because that's what he was doing. He was in the moment. He knew he had the surgery coming up. He was still skating, and he wasn't in unnecessary mental anguish about it. He accepted everything about it. So that was really inspiring for me, just conjuring that image of Chad, who taught me this just through his behavior, right? And I started thinking, why am I denying myself the joys of life right now when everything is fine, when I could die next week by getting hit by a bus on my bike? This is foolish, right? And identifying the pattern, thinking about the meditative awareness perspective, all of these things kind of came together. And then, I started to look at the research I was doing, and that's when I became aware. I was like, oh yeah, like most people are living in fear. Like I don't need to accept this defeatist mindset, right? So I really painstakingly pulled myself back, right? And I'm still, technically this predicament is still here, but I'm proud of myself for sitting here and channeling this into creativity, right? I'm doing something about it, right? And I think that was like a little test by the universe there. Like I almost slipped into fully identifying as a victim, fully identifying as someone who has been defeated and as someone who is suffering and who is sad and depressed and has this physical ailment. I was like about to take that on as my identity, right? And then that would have manifested an even worse physical outcome, right? But now I'm like, oh no, like why don't I take the mindset of someone who is healing, who is keeping a positive mindset, who is doing something about it, right? Oh, and getting over that hump just felt like a breath of fresh air. Really, really, really. And, I'm doing stuff. I'm like, okay, from the beginning, I've been asking, what is the universe trying to teach me? Right? Because that question can pull you out of the identification with what's going on. And that helped. I'm like, oh, maybe the universe is telling me like, I really should be putting only wholesome, healthy foods into my body. Maybe the universe is telling me to appreciate the fact that I am alive and that I have a body, and that having a body through which I can experience the world is the only reason I could possibly have physical ailments. Like I need the body. A physical ailment implies that you have a healthy body and there's a little something going on. But you got to be here in the first place, and maybe the universe is trying to tell me to appreciate that. Maybe the universe is trying to tell me not to take for granted the fact that I am alive and that I have senses and that I can explore beautiful things on this podcast and express myself and create and have relationships. None of this ailment stuff is getting in the way of that, right? And this is my circumstance. Like, obviously there are worse physical ailments that could have happened to me. And, that's another thing I was brought back to was, when I broke my foot, I was reading Stoicism, right? I would classify this as pre-spiritual awakening. I was not yet spiritual, but breaking my foot turned out to be a catalyst, right? I found Stoicism. I started making new kinds of content because I wasn't skateboarding. You could say the broken foot was a pivotal moment on my journey of awakening that actually brought me towards doing this podcast, which has been one of the most profoundly creative, fulfilling things I've ever done in my life, right? This is a source of great joy for me. And so, right, I have all this perspective now on the broken foot, and now I'm like grateful in a way for what happened, even though then I was suffering. And I'm grateful for my past self for going through that suffering and for making the best of it, for studying Stoicism at the time. Stoicism recommends when you're going through hardship, embrace it with your whole heart. That's what your present moment is. Be there. What are you going to do about it, right? So I did, and I started creating new things while my foot was broken. I started cultivating, and putting energy into my human relationships, because before that, all I was doing was skateboarding, right? So it turned out to be an opportunity. And I really tried to connect with this with my current predicament. I was like, okay, somehow, some way, a version of me who is out there is grateful for what I'm going through right now, because it's going to create who he is, right? So I tried to connect with that. I did a guided meditation. I'm still very a beginner at the guided meditations, but I did one on Patreon where I talked about kind of sitting there in meditation if you're going through a predicament and conjuring up your higher self or your future self who has already been through this situation, right? Because I can sit here and like feel what my past self went through with that broken foot, I know there's a version of me out there doing the same thing, right? There's this connection happening across the timeline, right? Somehow it's all here in this moment, and connecting to that was another very helpful thing that helped me kind of get over this hump of mental anguish and forgetfulness, right? That brought me back. That's a comforting thought, right? Stoicism. I was brought back to how much Stoicism helped me when I broke my foot. One of the things it recommends, which is kind of like this harsh thing to do, you wouldn't really think of it on your own, but and I'm referring to Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. he recommends that when you go through a hardship, imagine how much worse it could have been, right? So you take the example of when I broke my foot, and I was imagining how it could have gone better. But I could have alternatively imagined how it could have gone worse. What if I broke my foot even worse? What if I broke my leg? You know, it's kind of an extreme practice. You know what I mean? Like, thinking about how much worse it could be can also bring you back to the center, because that instills a sense of gratitude for what is, right? So it's a practice that brings you back to center, and that's the whole purpose. If you're back in the present, right? Nothing is wrong. Nothing's wrong at all. And that's very hard, and I just experienced that, and I continue to go through waves of this anxiety. It's the truth. When you're here, it doesn't really matter what your physical ailment is. You know, the ego is what creates this panic. The ego is clinging to life. It's clinging, identifying to the health of the body. I almost just fully buckled. I just stood up because the camera stopped recording, and I forget sometimes how long I'm sitting with my legs crossed. I gotta be careful. Right? The ego is clinging to the health of the body. And I remember when I was deep in my skateboarding career and I was very identified with being a skateboarder, I was like deriving my sense of self and my self-worth through my physical ability to skateboard, which is why it was very, very scary for me to break my foot, because suddenly I could not do the physical thing that was bringing me a sense of self-worth. Right? But that's all ego, because the place of awareness and center and presence that I'm always referring to is not the body. It is aware of the body. It's the awareness, right? It's a crazy idea, but through your own experience, you can feel it, right? There's an awareness that is aware of your body. So how can you be the body, right? If you feel sensations of the body, they're coming up in consciousness. How can you be the body? So this break in identification can be very, very freeing with medical health body predicaments like the one I'm going through, right? But the body is such a direct experience. So when there is something going wrong with the body, and I use wrong in quotations because I kind of believe that nothing wrong ever really happens, right? The universe is unfolding. What could be wrong, right? But when something little goes wrong with the body, or something big goes wrong with the body, since it's such a pronounced experience in our consciousness, it can be easy to lose the sense of awareness of the body, right? The fact that we transcend the body, we are not the body. You know, it's this line of thinking that can get you to overcome fear of mortality, right? Because if you really start to believe this is true, and this is something you can practice in meditation, it's when you're sitting there and meditating, you're just trying to be in the observer seat, trying to notice everything that is coming up in your consciousness, and the body, the sensation that you have a body, the feelings of the fingers and the limbs. All of this is just some abstract feeling in our consciousness that our brain interprets into this body, right? So you practice this with meditation, and when you really come to feel this in your own experience, it can eliminate the fear of death, right? Because death is something that while it's happening, we can be aware of, right? Yeah. And once I crossed over the hump, I was like, I was looking at mudras I could do to promote health. I took a more active approach in my healing and my wellness. And I also just decided, like, fuck it. I'm just going to try to be back in the center, and I'm not going to prematurely suffer for something that I don't need to suffer through. That's another Stoic, that I don't need to suffer through until it's in front of my face, and then I'll be able to deal with it. That's another Stoic wisdom. Don't prematurely suffer through shit, right? Like when it comes up and it's in front of your face, your intuition and your instinct in combination will face it, right? You don't have to spend a month, a week, even a day putting yourself in the future situation, right? Just be here now. Easier said than done, but all of this stuff I've been talking about is kind of how I brought myself back to the present, where I'm sitting here and sharing this. So I'm feeling much better now. Still dealing with the predicament. Maybe I'll keep you posted if this continues to be a significant part of my spiritual journey. I'll keep you posted if there's interest. And I think that's that's kind of what happened, and the significance of it on my journey. Highly recommend Meditations by Marcus Aurelius for anyone dealing with really any sort of misfortune. It could be the body, it could be something that went wrong in life. Great mindset here. And all of these philosophy labels, Stoicism, Buddhism, whatever it may be, spirituality, a lot of these things are getting at the same thing, which is that if you can bring yourself back to the present moment, everything is beautiful, right? Hell exists in the past and the future. Heaven exists in the present, right? Yeah. And I used to call myself Stoic George on TikTok, right? This is a significant conduit into my spiritual journey. So if you haven't given Meditations a try, I do recommend it. And it really helped me get through my broken foot, and I was reminded of it in my current predicament. So this has been a very helpful book for me. I do recommend it. I wasn't sure, I started to think, do I want to do the reading updates in every episode, or should I consolidate them into like a quarterly episode, like an episode about everything I've read in the quarter, something like that? And I figured, why not do both? So right now I'm reading A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. I heard she was running for president on TikTok. I saw a cool audio clip of her. I liked the audio clip. She was talking about being an artist. I resonated, so I decided to pick up her book to do some research. And I like the book so far. Generally now, when I read a book, I'm like, it's immediately obvious to me whether the author is writing out of ego or if they're writing about the truth. Right. And I say that cautiously because categorizing is never good. But A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson gets my stamp of approval. This is the truth. This is good stuff. It's the same shit as Ram Dass, as Osho, right? It's in the category of truth. Not that categorization means anything, but we have to use language, right? It's how we communicate. That felt so good. Man, I needed to get that off my chest. I'm really grateful that I figured this out, because this literally is me doing something about it, right? In addition to the eating healthier and the other stuff I'm doing to put myself in a healing perspective, I'm channeling this into creativity, and creativity is love. So I'm really glad I figured this out, and I'm feeling it right now. Like, I'm feeling better, right? And, when you're in that fear-based defeatist thinking, you're manifesting the worst for yourself, and you're putting your body and your cells in a state of tension and stress. I was literally making myself sicker, right? I think when it comes to health, like, the spiritual perspective is extremely important, because if you're accepting and present, your whole body system is going to be more lined up, and you're going to be much more able to heal. Right? So I'm so grateful for the peace I'm feeling in my body right now. Right? It took me a lot of courage to record this episode and to not put a mask on, right? Putting a mask on and hiding this, literally suppressing the issue inside my body, that was not going to let it come out. It needs to come out, right? It needs to heal. I put my mirror over there for this episode so you guys couldn't see the bed. And it's actually kind of genius. Now I'm flanked by the light because the window here is being reflected on that mirror, and I'm actually seeing the light on both sides. I might do this for every episode now. And maybe now I'll have courage to get into more subjects that I otherwise wouldn't have the courage to do. So, I'm already starting to see how in some way, all of this is part of my highest good. And I'm grateful to be connected to that perspective, because I lost it for a time there, and it was really hard, and I'm glad to be back, and I'm grateful to have all you here with this giving me this opportunity to express and explore the truth. Feel free to share your experiences with anything that resonated, anything that came to mind in the comments. I've said this before to my patrons, but please just dump your mind into the comments, just like what I'm doing, or, as a DM, if you want to ask a question, I'm just letting it come out, and I really encourage you to do the same. I'm consciously building a non-judgmental space where we are consciously exploring the truth together. And in order to do that, we cannot hold back. If you'd like to participate, please just share what's on your mind. Don't overthink it. You don't have to read it back and make sure, there's no typos or that you didn't say anything the wrong way. I will accept whatever you put there with a completely open heart. And if you have any questions, I'd love to talk about them on this podcast. So much love to you all. Thank you for allowing me to express myself about this, and I'll see you on the next episode.